She told a black teen to leave the pool, sure no one would challenge her ... Until the girl's father showed up, and the entire country club went silent. The sun hung high over Wellington Country Club, casting long shadows across the perfectly trimmed lawns. It was the kind of place where the scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with expensive sunscreen. Laughter echoed off the pristine cabanas, and certain kinds of families lounged under striped umbrellas while waiters in crisp uniforms refilled their drinks without a second thought. For Imani Carter, stepping into this world felt like stepping into a different universe. She wasn't unfamiliar with wealth. Her father, Governor Everett Carter, had ensured she grew up with every opportunity. But country clubs like this had a certain energy, an unspoken set of rules that dictated who belonged and who didn't. Still, she wasn't nervous. She had an invitation. Her best friend, Madeline Henderson, had been begging her to visit all summer. "You'll love it," Maddie had promised. "The pool's huge, the food is amazing, and trust me, the lifeguards are worth the trip alone." Imani had laughed it off, but deep down, she hesitated. She knew how places like this worked. Knew the way some people glanced at her, their eyes lingering just a second to long silent questions written in their stares. But Maddie had been persistent, and today, there were no excuses. The Hendersons' car had picked her up that afternoon, Maddie grinning beside her in the back seat. "I told my mom you were coming, and she added you to the guest list." "It's no big deal," Imani had smiled, appreciating the effort. "You sure they won't have a problem with me being there?" Maddie scoffed. "Of course not. My parents love you." But that wasn't really the question, and they both knew it. The club's entrance was a sprawling Mediterranean-style building, its grand columns gleaming under the sun. As they stepped inside, the blast of air conditioning was a stark contrast to the humid Georgia heat outside. The receptionist barely glanced up as Maddie signed them in. No hesitation, no questions. Imani let out a small breath. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Minutes later, they were out by the pool. The scent of chlorine filled the air, blending with the sound of splashing and chatter. It was the kind of easy summer soundtrack that made everything feel lighter. Imani set her bag down on a lounge chair, slipping off her sandals. The water shimmered, inviting her in. Maddie nudged her playfully. "Told you it's nice." Imani smirked. All right, you win." She stepped forward, dipping her toes into the cool water. The relief was instant, washing away any lingering hesitation. But just as she was about to lower herself in, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, young lady." It was clipped, carrying the expectation of obedience. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who was used to being listened to. Imani turned, blinking against the sunlight. A woman stood before her, hands on her hips, her expression carved from stone. A blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a pastel tennis dress that looked like it had never seen a court. Imani had seen women like her before. "I'm sorry, but this pool is for members only," the woman said. Her tone made it clear she wasn't actually sorry. Imani blinked. "I'm with Madeline. She signed me in." The woman's eyes flickered to Maddie, then back to Imani, as if weighing her next words. And just like that, the air shifted. Imani knew this wasn't just about club rules. But she wasn't about to back down. Silence stretched between them. The only sound was the lazy splash of water and the distant chatter of families enjoying their afternoon. Imani met the woman's gaze, steady and unflinching. Maddie jumped in before the silence could stretch too long. "Mrs. Lancaster, my mom signed Imani in. As my guest, she's allowed to be here." Mrs. Judith Lancaster barely spared Maddie a glance. "I don't recall seeing her name on the list." Maddie scoffed. "That's because my mom handles it online. You can check with the front desk if you want." Imani stayed quiet, reading the situation. The woman wasn't looking for an explanation. She was looking for an excuse. Mrs. Lancaster's gaze flicked back to her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but rules are rules." Sweetheart ... Imani felt her jaw tighten. "I understand that," she said evenly, "but I was signed in properly." I wouldn't be here if I wasn't allowed. Mrs. Lancaster let out a breathy, amused sound, shaking her head slightly. I don't mean to be difficult, but we have policies for a reason. Organized, right? Maddie's face was turning red. This is ridiculous. My mom. It's fine. Imani cut in, her voice calm but firm. She wasn't about to beg for permission to be somewhere she was invited. She reached for her bag, ready to walk straight to the front desk and shut this down herself. But then she heard it, a murmur, low voices. A couple lounging nearby, watching. The lifeguard shifting awkwardly on his perch. They were waiting, watching. Mrs. Lancaster wasn't just questioning a name on a list. She was waiting for Imani to second-guess herself, to feel out of place. And for that reason, alone Imani refused to. She looked Mrs. Lancaster in the eye. You can check with the front desk. I'm not going anywhere. Before the woman could respond, a deep voice interrupted. I think that's a great idea. Everything stopped. The security guard straightened. A hush spread through the pool area. Conversations died mid-sentence. Imani turned toward the voice, her chest tightening. Standing just beyond the lounge chairs, hands in his pockets, was Everett Carter, governor of Georgia, and the man whose name was etched onto the Wellington Country Club donor wall at the front entrance. Mrs. Lancaster's face paled. She knew exactly who he was. The tension thickened, enough to smother the entire pool deck. Everett Carter wasn't an intimidating man by nature. He wasn't the kind of politician who barked orders or flaunted his power. But there was something about him, a quiet authority that commanded attention. He stepped forward, his polished shoes tapping softly against the stone pavement. His gaze flicked to Imani, checking on her first before landing on Mrs. Lancaster. You seem very concerned about my daughter's presence here. I'd love to know why. Mrs. Lancaster opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer. Because there was none. If you made it this far, you know this story isn't just about a pool. It's about how moments like these happen all the time, and how silence lets them continue. So next time you see something like this happening, don't just watch. Say something, because when you stay silent, you let it happen. If this story made you think, hit that like button, subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice matters. Use it.